Very pleased to be here with Mary Gay Scanlon, a good friend of the podcast. And we were just talking about how more often we've seen each other over the airwaves, and it's so good you would come in person. Mary Gay represents the 5th Congressional District in Pennsylvania since 2018. She's on the Judiciary Committee in the House, which is quite a trip these days, and the Subcommittee on the Constitution, also quite a trip these days. Let's start here, though. This is your second convention, yes? Had you ever attended as a layperson, a citizen?
Actually, It's my first in-person convention.
Uh-huh.
2020 was virtual.
Oh, well, that's right, yeah.
And 2016 was in Philly, but I wasn't even in politics in Philly. So the convention happened around us, and I think I got to go to 1 or 2 events. Yeah. But this is the first, and my head's on a swivel.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that. You're the novice here. I talked to some people who've been here every convention since Carter, including the Pennsylvania delegation. Angie is the oldest delegate in the country. So you're spanking new. What's your wild-eyed? Tell us how it's feeling down there. Pennsylvania's pretty close. You got pretty good placement, by the dais. So
we are right in front of the dais, so it's all unfolding right in front of us. Right. And I got to meet Angie last night. She's lovely. Oh my gosh, she's so wonderful.
Yeah. She's an exact contemporary of my mom, who's died, but from Pittsburgh, know each other. I was I kneeled and interviewed her it was delightful. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, it's been an electric week. I mean, the weather is gorgeous. It's just bright sunshine every day, cool breezes. So the weather is great, get to walk around a little bit, but inside the convention halls, it's just been electric. I mean, we saw just 2 weeks ago when Harris Wall's ticket was launched in Philadelphia at Temple, and people were lined up around the block and just so excited for this launch. And of course, Governor Shapiro is in the midst of all this with his soaring oratory. So that has continued and just has been building day by day as we've been out here. I guess I'm saying day by day. We're on day 3.
Well, we're on day, but it's a good point, because day 1 struck me, nothing profound here, but a very much a sort of ceremonial passing of the torch, culminating with the president. Mm-hmm. And then yesterday, the first Harris Walls, for sure kind of ticket, a few mentions only of the president, and presumably the next couple days. Have you felt that kind of pivot from, current day, I mean, he's still president for 5 months, to the forward-looking orientation?
I think you're right. I think the Monday to Tuesday pivot was very much felt. But being able to say thank you, Joe, was just so important. I mean, the region I represent is between Scranton, where he was born, and Delaware, that he's represented for decades. And people adore Joe. Yeah. And, there was some resistance to the thought that he was being pushed out, because we adore him. He has been an incredible president, passing more significant legislation since probably the New Deal.
He'll definitely go down in history, right? Somehow he hasn't gotten his due. But he's that's got to be revised by historians, and a remarkable term.
Absolutely. But it's a different era in campaigning. Yeah. I mean, just the 6 years that I've been involved, I've gone from, I said, I'm interested in doing this, and someone said, you have to send 7 pieces of mail to win this district.
Mail.
And I was going, I think maybe not, but, we were all about texting in 2018, and now people are like, I don't want another text. So just seeing the evolution of media and how immediate things have to be, and seeing the rise and fall of Twitter, which at one point was a good source of information and now is just a hot dumpster fire.
Yeah.
So there's just been so much going on. So it is torch passing from this president to the next generation, but also the boomer generation is moving out, and we're seeing that across the workplace. And in politics as well.
Yeah. To my kids, I think it couldn't come too soon. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about the element of hesitation among your constituents. It seems now, a few months ago, in fact, this has been such a compressed, eventful time period, but definitely, and I can attest from Twitter, among other things, there was some real resistance, bitterness, sense of unfairness. And so maybe you had it more in your backyard, Congresswoman Scanlon, than others did. Talk about, those few days where the pressure was very strong. It looked like it might happen, but it wasn't certain, and how your constituents were reacting to the prospect of Biden stepping aside.
I think there's a genuine affection for the president. He is a good man and he is a public servant. And it feels very much like people want to give him his due. And that being said, he had amassed the delegates. It was his convention. It was his nomination to have. And people were telling me in the district, if he goes forward, we are going to work our tails off and we're going to get this done.
Okay, but that's putting it kind of mild. Anyone would say if he goes forward. Were you also hearing from people, protesting, opposing, saying this isn't fair what they're doing to him? Because you guys are neighbors, as it were, right? 5th District and as it were. Yeah.
Probably not a ton of that.
Yeah.
Probably not a ton of that. Just more, let's stop with the drama and let's do the work. Let's do something.
Yeah.
To paraphrase from last night.
All right. Let's now pivot. So tonight, the vice presidential nominee comes forward. Tomorrow, Kamala Harris has her, most important moment in the national spotlight of her career. A remarkable, almost you have to pinch yourself kind of month that incredible sort of head of steam coming in. But as President Obama reminded yesterday that, a tough race ahead, maybe back to the dynamic pre-debate of basically jump ball. What do you see as, and you're from Pennsylvania, which is famously, red and blue. What do you see as the genuine challenges or goals that both Walz and Harris have to accomplish tonight and tomorrow?
Well, we know it's been an introduction session over the last few weeks. While Kamala Harris has been on the national stage for a few years now, the role of the vice president is historically not to upstage the president. So, she has been in our area a lot. She and I have done a roundtable on reproductive health in the wake of Dobbs. She's been a huge proponent of addressing our maternal mortality crisis. She helped found the Black Maternal Health Caucus in Congress, which she was still in the Senate when I came in. So she's worked on that. She's worked on the Safer Communities Act. So she's worked on a lot of these issues, but of necessity and constitutional design. She hasn't been the face of a lot of it, although she has been the face on the reproductive health. So it's about introducing her. It's about introducing Tim Walz, who obviously has had a much lower profile in Pennsylvania. So making sure people are familiar with them, know their stories, although that is all being incredibly well received. So that's job one. And job two is the contrast. The contrast between the two party platforms, to the extent that the Republicans have a platform that wasn't written in Sharpie. But there are very, very clear contrasts. And it was so interesting on Monday, I think, our local tabloid, the Delaware County Daily Times, had a front page thing on the difference between the two candidates on 10 different issues, healthcare and immigration and voting rights, just, going down the list.
A matter of incredible concern to you personally.
Sure. So just very, very clear contrast between the two parties' positions and the two candidates' positions.
I actually have been struck, there's been such a, I wouldn't say surprising, but really notable upsurge of the word of the summer, joy, and I think the presentation or perpetuation of that feeling is a little bit at odds with the trashing of Trump, and that struck me as a kind of secondary or even tertiary theme so far. Let me ask you, because again, Pennsylvania, where my home state. Famously, Pittsburgh to the west, Philadelphia to the east, Alabama in between.
Yeah,
exactly. And I was really struck with President Obama last night making what seemed to be a really sort of earnest, good-hearted outreach to working class white voters of the sort that have abandoned the Democratic Party periodically since Reagan, but definitely as in part of the Trump coalition. So what's your sense there? So it's, follow up to what happens in the next 87. days as between a kind of get out the vote effort in the 5 counties around Philadelphia, but also the trying to bring on board some of those voters who, after all, we've had 8 years of Trump, and you would think it's very hard to find anyone whose mind isn't made up there. But Pennsylvania might be ripe pickings for it, and no state more important. What's your thought about those dual goals, other than we've got to walk and chew gum at the same time? I mean, really, how do you go about navigating both of them?
Well, I think when you're talking about the atmosphere, whether you call it joy or hope or optimism, that's the thing I've heard over and over again, including from my kids, is that I am feeling optimism for the first time in a long time. And some of that ties to the different party messages, because Trump's message for years has been, this is a failing country, we have to make it great again. American carnage, we're a third world banana republic. I mean, that
dark
is not
and doer, right? Yeah.
Dark and not forward looking, and make it great again for whom? Right. So the optimism that people are feeling is different. And you think about a young voter, someone who's 18, 19, 20, they were in grade school or middle school when Trump came down the elevator and started talking about Mexico not sending its best. I mean, just crazy stuff. So for them to have the opportunity to see a forward-looking, hopeful, we can do this together, that I think is super important and ties those two things together, a vision for the future and rejecting this division. Now, I agree that Obama's pitch was really, really interesting, but it is what we hear on the ground is like people don't want to fight with their neighbors. Yeah. They don't want to fight with their family over Thanksgiving dinner. Right. And we've seen that we're hearing that from folks. I had someone come into our office after the Harris Wall's debut in Philadelphia, and he said, I want a Harris Wall sign, but I want one that I saw online. It says, I'm a Republican, not a lunatic, vote for Harris Walls. So we did not have that specific sign yet, but
get it ready.
People are tired of it. And we work with folks, of all political stripes when we're setting up a food bank, or doing disaster relief, or working on our communities, or coaching a little league team. And I thought all that really, really resonated. I found myself saying, yes.
We've talked about it, but in fact, it really felt pointed to me the way the part of the convention so far, presumably we'll see more of this with Coach Walls tonight, is a kind of recapturing of, you could call them traditional values, used to be maybe Republican value, but the values of patriotism, community, Little League church, a kind of religious. I know you have, some of your work here has been among some of the people of different religious callings in Pennsylvania and the country. Maybe even patriotism, right? Where that sort of old-fashioned virtues. That's a little bit Democratic Party of 2024, yeah.
I would call it American virtues, right? I mean, patriotism, working together as a community, being forward-looking.
But the party has sometimes been painted demonically in a way that distances them from. So there'll be a little bit of a tussle, right? I mean, you were just talking about the darkness of Trump and how, in fact, if you take a clear-eyed look, it doesn't seem so old-fashioned or American patriotic values at all. But that'll be part of the struggle. And it's noteworthy that the party is positioning itself for these American virtues.
Sure. And I think that's been something ongoing. Actually, it was really interesting. I was talking to someone last night who had on some spectacular red, white, and blue flag spangled earrings.
You see some amazing stuff on the floor, don't you? Yeah.
And this guy said, it's the most overtly patriotic thing that I've purchased in a long time. But, I am a patriot. And some of the things that Democrats have been painted into corners on are standing up for those deeply American things like free speech or, the ability of people to do their own thing, love who they want to love, express their views, dissent peacefully. So, I think it's an overdue recalibration, but, all the things that make America a place that people from around the world want to come to. Yeah. Those are things that are Democratic and Republican values.
Except they really do feel like the antithesis of current day Republican values. Obama was a point in not wanting to demonize or caricature but really the feel of a Trump rally seemed so much more angry, so much less neighborly, so much less wholesome, really, in a down-home way. All right, 30 seconds on the House and, a lot of the occasional exhortations of taking it back. You labor in some of the worst, toughest vineyards, or just the craziest. You live like in a Catch-22 or a Heller novel with crazy shit everywhere. What, in Pennsylvania anyway, are there little inroads that you're looking toward that make you optimistic to a few seats switching, or how's the Pennsylvania dynamic figure in the national effort to retake the House?
Sure.
And feel free to mention Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz or whatever if you like. It's totally up to you.
No, we're really optimistic about Pennsylvania. We've got a couple good pickup opportunities out in the middle of the state. The seat that's been held by Scott Perry. We have a great candidate, Janelle Stelson, who's a 30-year broadcaster in that area, former Republican, but like many Republicans, the party has left her, and she's running a great campaign out there. And so we're very optimistic about that one. And of course, Mr. Perry at the same time has had significant legal troubles because of his deep involvement in January 6th.
I mean deep. It's been so noteworthy exactly. So noteworthy that so far Congress has been unscathed. But when they start, and maybe they've already started, as you say, it starts with Perry, who is the guy who ushers in John Eastman and makes the marriage with Trump. So that would be quite a pickup.
So that's one.
Yeah.
And the other one is the first district where Ashley Ehaz is running.
Yeah.
And she's a very strong candidate and is really leaning into the fact, as you said, reclaiming patriotism. She flew combat missions. She's a helicopter pilot, served her country with distinction, and is all in on the issue of women's freedoms.
Yeah. Tammy Duckworth last night, or from the, when she tells her own record and then talks about the 5-time bone spur deferments. I mean, it's very strong. All right, let's talk a little bit about your own interests as a member and how they dovetail with the campaign or what you're hoping for. Can't get everything from this is the unified, let's get them elected, but you're very focused on the court, I think, and Supreme Court reform and maybe access to justice. I've been struck that the portrait of Harris so far has really led with the kind of, if you want to talk about traditional values, starchy, tough on crime prosecutor, less the kinds of equal justice values. But let me just ask, well, let's start with the court. Mm-hmm. So, and that's, something that Harris can be involved in, but it's tricky. As you know, you're a former lawyer, a career lawyer until you moved in 2018. What's your view of the Biden proposals? What is to be done? There's the brick wall of the Supreme Court at the end of all these things. How are you approaching it? And how much does the issue, which is typically a kind of pointy-headed issue, how much is it now with opinions like Dobbs, as you mentioned, really hitting home with your constituents?
Well, the increasingly extremist decisions that we've seen coming out of the court this cycle have moved opinion in the district, moved the White House, because Biden had not yet come out with a proposal on what to do with respect to the Supreme Court. I've found it really striking about, 6-8 weeks ago, when the last decisions came down in the court, to go out to farm markets and have people asking me about the Chevron decision.
Wow.
You talk about pointy-headed issues. Right. But people are really concerned about it.
Great times for nerds. Yeah.
But they're seeing the immediate impact on things like the environment, et cetera. And then when you have Project 2025 really showing the roadmap for what the next Trump administration would do with respect to completely uprooting federal protections. I mean, clean air, clean water, protections for people's civil liberties.
Well, a lot of the Chevron decision does that already, yeah?
Right. Well, it's there, but then combining that with these other things coming down, it's really, really striking. And people have been moved by that. I've been really encouraged. I have not been a big fan of the idea that you pack the court, because our problem with the court right now is that through a bunch of shenanigans in the Senate, they weighted it down with right-wing extremists. But if we then just add people who are further to the left, then it delegitimizes the court for a whole different group of people. And we need to get it back to something that people believe in. So this idea that you would do the term limits and people would be there.
Your thumbs up on the term limits?
I am thumbs up on the term limits. We've seen it work with other courts. We've seen it work, around the world. We're one of the few courts that has this forever court. But it also would reduce the crisis mode that we end up in whenever someone leaves the court, whether, voluntarily or through some health issues. So I think that's a good step forward. I think, as a lawyer, there's some issues with how you impose an ethics requirement on the court, and that's going to be tricky as well.
And what happens if the court, as Justice Alito already says thank you, but no thank you,
Exactly.
and all this stuff. It's so almost everything out here you have. If I can stay pointy-headed, the sort of de Tocqueville maxim that everything ends in America as a lawsuit. And now, but at every turn now, you have to play knowing that the last stop is a rough stop, and you want to avoid that stop. That changes so many political and legal contests, yeah?
Well, and I mean, we need to get Congress back to working as well, because so many of the issues that have people exercise, whether it's the undermining of the Voting Rights Act or the Dobbs decision really upending 50 years of women's freedom to control their destiny, much less their bodies. All of these decisions can be fixed legislatively. So there has been maybe an over-reliance on the courts to fix things. We need to get everybody working together.
Last question. What are the next 76, 10 weeks and a little look like for you personally?
Sure. We're going to be moving heaven and earth to get every voter out there.
What's that mean exactly? How do you, what's a congressperson's role there?
Well, being from Pennsylvania is very parochial. So it doesn't always help us when folks jet in from other places to say, well, do this, that, and the other thing.
They do incessantly.
Yes. So we try to play a coordination game on the ground, working with all the various groups that are interested, working with our state legislators, because our state house, which has a 1-vote margin right now, is also everyone up for election. And we've got Senator Casey running as well. So it is working with the various campaigns. I have 19 colleges in my district, and that's before you even get to some of the big Philadelphia ones that are not physically in the district. So I've always focused a lot on youth vote and being on campuses and having forums and giving college voters an outlet to express their will to the voters or to the government. We have some really financially challenged, economically challenged regions, Chester, Southwest Philadelphia, and Norristown. So making sure we get heavily into those regions. Our campaign has even been investing in some of the rural center of the state regions with helping provide them with resources for rent in campaign offices and such, because those votes matter too. We've seen that the area that I represent has only recently flipped from red to blue, and knowing that there are other Democrats out there or other people who are not MAGA extremists helps other people come to the front and say, oh, yeah, no, I like that idea. I'm going to vote on it.
Yeah. We spoke to Senator Casey on that. You run into everybody, and he reminded he's in a very tight race himself. Yes. Mary Gay Scanlon, this is our 300th episode. And when we were a little engine that could, just tugging along, you've been our friend all along. So I want to thank you for showing up for Talking Feds. Hope you'll continue to do it. And Godspeed to you and your efforts in the next 76 days.
Well, thank you. I always enjoy it. It's always a high-level conversation with a lot of humor.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.